Councillor Noakes as the first meeting of Planning Subcommittee B. Before we start the meeting, I have a few announcements to make about the meeting rules. This meeting is being in-streamed by Southwark Council's YouTube channel, and a recording of it will be available after the meeting. Please note, all guests will have the microphones muted when they join the meeting. You will be asked to remain on mute unless I ask you to speak. For example, in the 3-minute slots reserved for objectors, the applicants, supporters, and ward councillors. Please do not switch on your microphone until I have given you permission to speak. Attendees who are using the telephone dial-in function on a smartphone are also muted. If I ask you to speak, please dial 6 to unmute yourself. To ensure that this virtual meeting runs smoothly, only one individual will be allowed to speak at any time. Any person speaking must be permitted to finish what they are saying without interruption. If I request that an individual stops speaking, they should do so immediately. Interruptions may result in you being disconnected from this meeting. If a member of the subcommittee wishes to speak, could I ask them to indicate this by the raised hand symbol or on the message board? Members of the public are reminded that the message board is not for public use. Any messages left on the message board by members of the public will be disregarded by committee members. Bearing in mind that this meeting is live streamed and that is recording available on the Council YouTube channel, if you are planning to speak, you may choose to switch off your camera so that you cannot be heard. Members of the public who are disconnected from the meeting due to technical difficulties should use the link of dial instructions that were sent initially on return of the meeting. Members of the public are welcome to record, a screenshot, or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the Council's protocol for reporting the filming is available on Southwark's website. During the meeting, members of the Planning Subcommittee will not access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting. Send or receive emails, text messages, or tweets concerning the business of the committee to anyone outside the meeting. Please note that members may be accessing the agenda papers by the internet. We will be taking 5 minutes a screen break on every hour and reconvening immediately afterwards, after the 5 minutes are over. I would like to ask officers to introduce themselves and explain their roles to this meeting. Officers, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Dipesh Patel. I'm the Senior Planning Officer here and to advise I'm here to advise members of the committee on planning and general issues relating to the applications under consideration today.
Thanks, Chair. My name is Glenn Moran. I'm the case officer presenting on item 7.2, which is 454 Lagarde Road.
Good evening, Chair. My name is Sonia Watson. I'm the Planning Officer presenting and advising members of the subcommittee on item 7.3.
My name is Alex Gillott. I'm a planning lawyer for the council and I'll assist with any legal issues that may arise.
Good evening. My name is Gerald Goler. I'm the constitutional officer and clerk to this subcommittee. I'm here to minute the meeting and to advise on the procedure for hearing the items and for decision making.
Do we have any apologies of absence, please, for this meeting?
Yes, to Councillor Carl Easton and Councillor Cleo Sounds.
Confirmation of voting members. I will now ask the members of the committee to confirm that they are voting members of this committee. And I will name one by one all the members. And can you please say yes when I mention the name? Councillor Sirajul Islam?
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Victoria Mills,
Yes, Chair.
Councillor David Noakes,
Yes, Chair.
Councillor Martin Seaton.
Yes, Chair.
I can confirm that I too am a voting member of this committee. Notification of any items of business which the chair remains urgent. The following additional documents have been circulated before the meeting. Supplement agenda contain meetings from meeting on the 14th of September. And the item 7.3, the report appendices. Addendum report is available for item 7.2 and 7.3 and the members pack. I think all of us have received those. Disclosure of interest and dispensation. Does any member wishes to declare any interest of dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this meeting?
No, Chair.
Thank you. The meetings were already, because there were only 2 people meeting on the 14th, so the minutes have now signed and agreed by Councillor Martin Seaton and myself, because they were the only 2 present members today and members that they were there on the 14th. So that item is already being resolved.
Great, Chair.
Thank you. The development manager, the next item on the business concerns the determination of planning applications. I would like to remind everyone of the subcommittee guidance on the conduct of the business. Officers will present the report, outline the recommendations, and answer questions raised by the subcommittee. If present and wishing to speak, if any present wishing to speak, the following may address the committee, no more than 3 minutes each. 1 spokesperson representing any objectors to the application. By now, you will have do we have anybody that they are objectors? We have objectors today, have we?
Chair, there are no objectors who have registered to speak.
They are not, okay. So the applicant and their agent, the spokesperson representing the supporters of the application. No, sorry, apologize. I'm reading what is supposed to happen during the evening. Sorry, apologize about that. 1 spokesperson representing the objectors, that I understand that there are no objectors today. The applicant or their agent, the spokesperson representing any supporters of the application who live within 100 meters of the development site, a ward councillor representing the area affected by the proposal. Each speaker should restrict their comments to the planning aspects of the proposal and should avoid repeating information which is already in the report. The meeting is not a hearing, which are all participants present evidence to examine by other participants. At the end of each representation, the subcommittee may ask questions to the presenter. Speakers should have and should lead the subcommittee to subjects on which they would welcome further questioning. Ward members in attendance and those nominated to speak on behalf of objectors and supporters and applicants may be asked to make further brief contributions in case any issue needed to be clarified after they have addressed the meeting. This is not an opportunity to make any party debate of the subcommittee. After receiving all submissions, the subcommittee will debate the application and consider the recommendations. This is a council subcommittee meeting, which is open to the public, and there should be no interruptions from members of the public. Finally, I would like everybody present to know that although the planning subcommittee comprises members from different political parties, we are not politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and based on the information contained with the relevant reports, together with consultation, responses, and any other verbal submissions made today. How we approach these applications is set to the development management report on item 7. And if members are happy to note that the report will be on consideration of planning applications. 7.1 has been withdrawn now from the agenda. So we go to 7.2, which is 54 Larga Road, London SC15 2TD, pages 55 to 62 on the agenda pack and pages 1 to 2 on the addendum report. Considering the officer's report, can the officer, Glenn, can you please kindly do your presentation?
Sure, thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen just so I can share the slides. 1 second. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the application, as you can see here, is for the demolition of 8 existing self-contained flats on site and the removal of a parking area to facilitate the creation of 33 self-contained studio flats with associated communal facilities, landscaping, refuse, cycle and amenity provisions. The site itself is, as I say, it's an existing 2-story building containing 8 existing flats located on the northwestern side, I should say, of Lugard Road. The area surrounding it is predominantly defined by sort of low density residential units that includes flats and terraced housing. And to the rear of the site, 2 things to note. 1, obviously the active railway line there, and B, the green embankment is also a site of importance of nature conservation. So just to note that as well. As I say, the application itself is for the demolition of the existing units on site to facilitate the creation of 2 blocks, which would contain 33 studio flat units laid out in a container style. I suppose the key thing to note about this application is it is for a effectively unique form of affordable housing. It will be provided by a charity. In this particular case, it will be Centrepoint, who are also the applicant and I believe are due to speak. In terms of the unique form of affordable housing they've offered, just to explain it, the eligibility criteria for someone to live in one of these units would be as follows. It would be single individuals between the ages of 18 and 25. This would be a person who's in full-time employment or has an apprenticeship role. The person has lived within supported accommodation or has very low / no enduring support needs from their key worker, or a person at risk of homelessness. For example, someone who's recently left home, is struggling to find a new one. They may be surface sofaing or temporarily staying with friends and family. And they need to demonstrate they can live independently, and Centrepoint does operate a vetting process as part of that. In terms of rents and costs, the cost would be capped at no more than 33% of a tenant's income, with a maximum income threshold of £31,500. That's based on the London living wage of £21,000 plus 50%. The maximum tenure on one of these units would be 5 years, and that would include a 12-year probationary period. So in effect, it is a form of temporary housing for young individuals. One key thing to note is that the units themselves are below our policy requirement for a studio unit. They're 19.5 square meters, whereas policy would require a studio unit to be 37.5. So obviously this is a reduction in floor space compared to what we would typically accept. However, in this instance, we are willing to support the proposal based on the temporary nature of the housing combined with the targeted nature of the eligibility criteria and the reduced cost for the young people who would find themselves staying in these units. In effect, this is a unique solution to a unique problem. It's young people that are at risk of homelessness and are, in the case of people sofa surfing or moving between homes, can often be overlooked. Centrepoint has a good reputation as a charity and provides a huge amount of support for young people, both in finding employment and finding housing. And this pilot program, I'm very confident that they can deliver an excellent service for young people in this regard. All of this will be secured via the legal agreement as well, which is important to note. So in terms of eligibility and costs, all that will be bound up in it, and that will be secured via that. In terms of objections, we've received 7 to this application. There's a number which are outlaid in the report. I suppose the 2 primary ones which come up most often are around parking in the one instance, and I'll just explain that briefly. The proposal isn't deemed to present a huge risk in terms of parking stress. I suppose the main reason being, if we consider the the eligibility criteria and who is actually going to be staying in this, it's extremely unlikely these individuals will have private cars. Again, these young people who are potentially coming out of homelessness or potentially going into it, just finding their feet. So the odds of these individuals driving is extremely low. We should also note the site has a reasonable public transport accessibility level, or PTAL. I believe it is 3 or 4. Let me just check. Sorry, it is a PTAL of 4, which is quite good, and it's less than a 5-minute walk from Queen's Road Station, Peckham. So obviously there's quite a good transport link there. The second, I suppose, main track of objection has been in terms of sort of antisocial behaviour and site management. So Centrepoint has provided to us a housing strategy management plan, and that would be that would involve sort of how the site is managed and that sort of thing. So sort of sets out the probationary period for individuals, the code of conduct they're expected to sign up to and agree to. As well as that, it would also contain what would happen in the case of antisocial behaviour. So while there's no direct management on site, and a lot of this is designed to facilitate independent living for younger people, there is obviously contacts at the charity who are managing the properties and are available for both the staff, both the tenants, which I'll come back to in a second, or members of the public who may, on the off chance there is an issue, they're available. And I believe part of the strategy is to respond to any complaint within 1 working day. So Centrepoint are committed to engaging with the local community in the event of any problems, and as well as that, they're committed to aiding and assisting young people as they live on site. I suppose that also ties into what I was going to talk about next, which is sort of support for young people throughout the project. So, and I'm sure Centrepoint can discuss this more when they're due to speak, but they'll have tenants on site will have access to a range of support officers. That includes an independent living advisor for young people who are not used to living by themselves, so they can consult with this person to, I suppose, just get to grips with living independently, potentially for the first time. I did mention a second ago, as part of the eligibility criteria, they just demonstrate they can live independently, but some people may have some questions and they can always use some help, and Centrepoint is there to support them. As well as that, Centrepoint do offer mental health and counselling services, and they have trained professionals for that, should that become an issue, if someone is experiencing some sort of difficulty in that regard. And that housing strategy management and I suppose safeguarding plan for people's well-being will all be included in the legal agreement and secured via that. So that is sort of locked in, again, via the 106. But yeah, as I say, it's a slightly unusual scheme. I suppose we've never really seen anything like it before, but it is a bit of a pilot scheme for Centrepoint. But in terms of the project itself, officers are supportive of it. We're recommending approval. And at this point, I'd welcome any questions on it. I'll stop sharing my screen just now.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Does anyone, the members, would like to make any comments or need clarification from the officer, please? Councillor Mills, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder whether we could have confirmation about why the construction is as it is, and whether we know whether a kind of more permanent structure wasn't planned, and also whether there are any views on the quality of design. Obviously, we're accepting very small room sizes, and I think there's a case to be made for that. But part of the kind of weighing up should be that that's coupled with high quality design.
Yeah, certainly. So just in terms of the sort of room size and design choices, obviously some of this has been impacted by the choice of these sort of repurposed container units and how those sort of impact on size. Saying that, I appreciate it is below what we normally accept for a studio, and obviously we wouldn't really accept it in, I think, any other circumstances. But I suppose a key aspect of this is it is designed for single individuals, as opposed to, for example, in a studio, you could have a couple potentially living in that. So this is for single individual, and there's no sort of families or children on site or anything like that. So that sort of in part forms the decision for the size of the units, that it is based on one person. I'm sure, again, Centrepoint could probably talk a bit about that in a second. The second thing was about design. In terms of design, there's not really not really too much for coherence, or no, I shouldn't say coherence, not much of a consistency in the area. You do see a mix of sort of Victorian terraced housing, but there's also more modern flat developments from the 1980s and 1990s. And the design here proposed, it is a bit unusual, but I think Centrepoint have done a good job of putting together an attractive design using sort of modern materials. But they've also made very good use of green space. So I think there's about 300 odd square meters of outdoor amenity space. We are securing a landscaping plan through the conditions as well. So yeah, it is a modern design, but there's a lot of good aspects to it. And I think the quantum of green space proposed definitely helps. It would really improve as well, that sort of, if you go down to the site at the moment, the houses that exist there, which are supposed to be demolished, they're not much to look at. I wouldn't say they're good or bad, they're just fine. The car park to the back is quite unsightly. It's just a large area of hard standing. So it's a good opportunity to increase sort of urban greening in the area, if that makes sense.
Sorry, on the other point, why containers and temporary construction rather than something permanent? Or should I ask Centrepoint?
I think Centrepoint can comment on it. I'll briefly get into it, but I believe part of it is to keep construction costs down. Obviously, Centrepoint are a charity, and so that is part of it. But I believe it's also, in terms of carbon savings, it achieves quite a high carbon saving overall. I think it's approximately 60 or 65%. So there is I suppose, sustainability argument for it as well. And the modular construction makes it a lot easier to stand up, or if they need to stand it down, if they want to, if the site, for whatever reason, gets redeveloped in the future, it makes it a lot easier for that. So.
Has that answered all your questions, Victoria? David Noakes, Councillor Noakes, you have a question?
Chair, I do. Two, actually. One is picking up on Councillor Mills's point around the quality of the residential accommodation and our residential design standards. As Councillor Mills has indicated, the proposed units are significantly smaller than are normally the minimum floor requirement. So instead of being 37 square meters, they're 19.5, which is significantly less. Now, of course, I understand the reasons for that, and I have to say I welcome what's being proposed by Centrepoint. But I just want to understand, in policy guidance, I mean, one of the rationales behind, sort of in regards to accepting that, is that it's sort of temporary accommodation. But in regards to the fact that people can stay there up to 5 years, is there any sort of policy guidance as to what's considered to be temporary or not in regards to how long someone's staying at site? So that's my first question. And my second question is just around, maybe this is one that Centrepoint can answer, if not the officer, but they talk about the independent living advisor. And is it planned that that person will be on site, or is that a sort of a telephone resource, or how is that provided?
I'll just answer the second question first, although I will largely let the applicant answer that question. But my understanding is that they're not on site as a permanent fixture. Again, part of the idea behind this scheme is that it does facilitate independent living. There's not sort of, I suppose, to think in, if we were compared to student housing, there wouldn't be the equivalent of an RA on site or something like that, if that makes sense. But again, I'm sure Centrepoint get into this. That's not to say that person can't go on site. I imagine that facility would be available, but I'll let them sort of discuss that. Just on the question about temporary housing and in terms of policy guidance, I'm not aware, although perhaps Dipesh could answer this in greater detail, of a specific policy time frame on temporary housing. We're quite satisfied that 5 years is a reasonable time to, get people in, get them on their feet, give them an opportunity to build up, advance their career, go through their apprenticeship, whatever it may be. But ultimately get used to living independently, but then move on to something more suitable for them, something more long-term and something more suitable for their needs. I suppose people may have different needs after 5 years. They may have found they've settled in, they may want to move in with some friends, they may want to continue to live on their own. That may be an option. But we're quite confident 5 years is a reasonable time frame for that. So we're satisfied there.
I might just come in there, Councillor, to answer the question about temporary, and it's an interesting question. We commonly give permission for various sites to be used on a temporary basis a number of things. So, for example, Metropolitan and Marcato, which is a development site, that was given permission, temporary permission for 5 years. That has, I think, in the last 2 years ago was renewed. So we do that. I think for living accommodation, something for 5 years is really sort of pushing at what can reasonably be described as temporary. It's certainly at least medium term. But this is maybe something that Centrepoint can expand on. They will review the young person's situation on a regular basis. So it won't be a case of getting to year 5 and then off you go. They'll review it with them at year 2, 3, and 4. And the idea is as I've had it explained to me, is for them to be able to move on before they get to 5 years. But if they can't, they're not going to be pushed out.
Sorry, Chair, could I ask one more question?
Yes, Councillor Knox, you can.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
It's just that, sorry, it just came to my head. In regards to, so obviously we're sort of consenting this, or potentially on paper, but and obviously Centrepoint are a well-known organisation who I think we'll all be familiar with their good works. But is there anything to protect the sort of usage in the sense that it can't then suddenly, if Centrepoint are, don't continue with this project, because what will happen to it then? What sort of consent will it have? Is there any sort of restrictions about the usage as it remains for this sort of temporary affordable use in the future?
So the use itself is as on paper. Within the legal agreement are some of the assurances. So over the tenancy duration, the affordable or the amount of rent, as Glenn has outlined, and some of the housing management strategies. So if Centrepoint were to move somewhere else or to put this up for sale, anyone coming in would need to still comply with those requirements. And if they weren't, then it would be a different type of application. So, for example,
does that include it being continuing to be temporary housing as effectively or not?
Yes, yes. Yeah. So all of the controls, they would need to have these special requirements for people who have recently been homeless or at risk of being homeless. There'd need to be young people. So all of these were tied into the 106, and anyone else would need to comply with those. This wouldn't be allowed to then become another type of housing. So either private rent or even another type of affordable housing. So that wouldn't be possible with the legal agreements the way it's going.
Okay.
Okay. Does anybody else have any more questions to the officer?
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. So can we move on to, do we have anybody that's like to speak in objection to this application? We have received registered 3 speakers, which are Sally Olop, Sei Obakin, and Helen Crane.
Sorry, Chair, those are actually the applicant.
They're the applicant
speakers.
Okay.
There are no registered objectors, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. So in that case, can we go to the applicants, please? And then the applicants will have 3 minutes to make the presentation. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Last year, 510 young people asked the Council for help with homelessness. The majority of those young people needed support that would require them to be offered supported housing. But many of them did not need any support at all. They just needed an affordable place to live in. And there are 150 of those young people in Southwark today. This evening, there are young people in supported housing hostels who are able and ready to move on, but they can't afford to do so. That's why Centrepoint came up with this important scheme, and it is why the scheme has been supported by our board and many of our supporters. Last November, our patron, Prince William, who's also very supportive, opened the first one, an apprenticeship house in Lewisham. And over the next 2 years, we will deliver 300 homes. That support means this scheme before you tonight will not cost the borough a penny. the entire build cost, £1.5 million, has been put up by these supporters. And one of the reasons for that wonderful level of support is that it is a truly unique scheme, a unique solution to a unique problem. A housing option in which young people will never be asked to pay more than a third of their income in rent, ever. A solution that young people themselves have seen and are hugely excited about. To put this in context, a young person who starts a full-time apprenticeship on minimum wage today would only pay rent of £49 per week. And after 50 years of working with young people, Centrepoint knows very well the importance of pastoral care and safeguarding. Even though young people will be living independently, they will not be left on their own because we will provide 3 layers of pastoral care. 1, each young person will have a forward plan, and paid independent living officers will check in with them periodically. 2, all young people will have access on a voluntary basis to an independent living advisor as a matter of choice, a mentor with whom they can just about discuss anything. And 3, we've established a partnership task force with Cordon People, a specialist recruitment firm that will help anyone who loses their job to get back into employment. This is in addition to whatever help they can get from Job Centre Plus and the new youth hubs. And in order to cap the rent at 1/3 of pay and offer this level of pastoral support, Centrepoint accepts that this scheme will probably never be profitable for us. We're not in this for a profit. We're in it to give young people this chance in their lives. And if you approve it, you will be giving 33 young people probably the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance for them to plant their fit family in work without worrying about how to pay the landlord, a chance for them to have stability in their lives that most of us take for granted.
You have 30 seconds to go.
And a chance after 5 years for them to move on into their own family homes. Some of them would do so earlier than 5 years. In short, you'll be giving them a chance to turn their lives around once and for all. And over 50 years, your decision today, if you approve, will give that chance to at least 330 young people. So I commend it to you and ask you to please find it in your heart to say yes.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant, please?
No, Chair.
Well, I do have, sorry, Councillor Knox, please, because I have a question as well after Councillor Knox.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Obviously, we know lots about Centrepoint and their very good work. How would people apply for these? Would it be through the council's homes allocations, or would it be through your own allocation system?
So I'll answer this. So good evening, everybody. I'm Sally Orlock. I work for Centrepoint. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. So referrals could come from anywhere, Councillor Oaks, so they would come through Centrepoint, but this scheme is not just for Centrepoint young people, it is for young people who, as we've said, are ready to live independently, 18 to 25, who are working or on an apprenticeship and who potentially are at things. So we get referrals from the local authority, we'd get referrals from other partners and also from our own Centrepoint young people.
And sorry, just can I have one follow-up question, Chair?
Yes, that's fine. Thanks.
And is it just for Southwark residents, or is it open to anyone across London to apply, or what's the criteria?
It's open to anybody across London who has that criteria that we've explained about, the job and the apprenticeship. But clearly, we would give priority to Southwark residents where we could, because obviously they would be working potentially closer and living in the existing borough.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mills, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess it would be good to understand how that system of priority for Southwark young people would work, whether that's something we need to write into the planning or if it's elsewhere. So I guess that's the first thing. Secondly, it would be good to understand whether Centrepoint think that they could have produced a higher quality building. I take on board the kind of comments we had from officers on that. And then finally, I'm really keen that this doesn't become supported housing, because actually it's really vital that we have a step down from supported housing. So how are we making sure that if there are kind of comments and requests coming in to make sure the young people are supported, we're not going, or you're not going too far, because you know it seems to me that this has got to be really vital, that it's that next step. It's not just supported housing again.
Okay, I shall attempt to answer those questions and might get support from my colleagues if that's acceptable. Just to pick up on your point around good quality design and build. So we did quite a lot of consultation with young people when we started looking at our property strategy and independent living, and they've very much influenced the design and build that we've come up with for Lugard Road. So we've really listened to a young person's voice, and most important for them was absolutely getting their own front door. You know, being in shared accommodation is not where they want to be at 20, 22, 23. So that absolute own front door was really important for us. And we really think the design build is good. I mean, Glenn has obviously supported us through this and said, you know, the design is lovely, the out space is good, the inside of the units are small, but they're so clever in their design that they do give an appearance of space. So we're really happy that young people have influenced and supported the design. So I'm hoping that might cover that for you. I love your point around not being dragged into supported, because it's so easy to do. And we've been really clear on the pilot that Shay talked about, that our patron opened for us in Lewisham, where we've got a 7-bedroom property. We've been really careful to do exactly that, to make sure that the level of support is appropriate for the young person. But I think, councillors, a lot of it is to do with the assessment process that we do for young people. Making sure they have got low or no support needs is really important. So I'm hoping that's answered your questions.
It was really good on 2 of them, just the kind of like, how can we ensure the priority for Southwark young people?
I think Depesh should take that.
Well, can I just have a go on that actually? We're quite happy for the entire scheme to be filled with Southwark young people. What we don't want is for the scheme to lie empty because, you know, people don't come forward. So if I know that there are 150 young people in Southwark today who would probably qualify, and I'll quite happily put all 33 of those units into Southwark. It doesn't matter to us where they come from. What matters most is that they meet the criteria so that the process and the project can be successful. And that criteria, I can't reiterate it enough, is that they cannot have support needs. It is not supported housing. We'll give them pastoral care, but they must not have support needs. And they must be able to work. They have to be able to earn money. Now, whatever money they earn, they'll only pay a third in rent, and we are prepared for that. But that sense that they are earning and they're progressing is really, really crucial. So those are important criteria that we'll be looking at.
Thank you very much for your presentations. And I think that the questions have been very good, but I have one further question from Councillor Seaton. Councillor Seaton, please.
Thank you, and thank you all for your presentations. Again, extremely informative, and the scheme is very innovative and shows what can be achieved with some creative thought processes. But I'm very conscious, of course, that with all the design and the support that is present, and it's been, the term's been used, that it is quite expensive to manage. But you've set up a financial package to allow this to happen. What if 5 years' time you found that you could not continue to subsidise, because that's effectively what you're doing, this scheme? What would happen? You would wish to answer.
I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, I've just done that. Well, so Councillor Seaton, I don't anticipate that. Centrepoint has been around for 50 years, and we want to be around, hopefully, for no longer than another 50 years. Hopefully, because actually our aim is to end youth homelessness altogether. If it's possible, then we've done ourselves out of a job and we'll have done our job. So I don't anticipate that. This scheme has a lot of support. We've set aside now the funding we need to build it. Our board is committed to funding the scheme year after year by way of the operating costs around it, because we know that the rent is not going to cover the cost. The reason we are especially committed to this scheme is because we know, we can see what's happening in our supported housing hostels, where young people are being, the place is silting up because young people who are ready to move on can't actually afford to move on. And actually, this is something that, since we've been talking about it, has really excited and energized a lot of supporters. The idea that actually we can create something that is in between being in a hostel and being completely on your own of this sort is really powerful. So I don't envisage that is a problem.
If I may, Chair, just to push the Chairman just one more time on this one. In order to concede on our space standards to the degree which we've been asked to concede, there has to be exceptional circumstances, and the transitional support scheme which you set up set out quite a few exceptional circumstances. But I'm of course concerned not about a legacy for myself, of course, but for legacy for yourself and the community. So of course, how do we build into this an assurance that Centrepoint will continue to support the scheme beyond 5 years? I can see the first 5 years, I can see you've raised the money for that, and that's not a problem, but I'm just trying to understand how can you sustain it 10, 15, 20, 25 years? And if you can provide some useful response that addresses that specific question. The rest I understand, but that specific question, how can we be assured that this will be sustained by Centrepoint for more than 5 years, financially speaking, of course?
I don't think you can have any assurance of that. And if I give you any kind of assurance, I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years. But here's what you can draw assurance from. You can look at our 50-year history. You can look at how our income is constructed right now. 60% of our income is actually from voluntary funds. It's not from anything that is tied to government. And a lot of that 60% is actually from a lot of individuals. There are 70,000 individuals who give money to Centrepoints today, and that number is rising. So it seems to me that actually the case for homelessness support, for supporting young people who've had this kind of challenge, is well made for the general public. And as long as Centrepoint continues to make that case, I can't really see that sort of income dropping off. Now, the most significant outlay in this project is the build cost. That's the £1.5 million that we have already set aside. And actually the board, my board, is stepping out and saying, doesn't matter what the operating cost is at the end, because actually that operating cost is not likely to be material in relation to the size of Centrepoint. So we will continue to support that operating cost every year. Now, I don't know what's going to happen next year, let alone 5 years. But what I can tell you with absolute clarity is that everybody in Centrepoint is absolutely committed to this scheme right now. And by the way, that's why our ambition is limited at this point to delivering only 300 homes. We're not saying we want to build 3,000 homes. We know we can support 300 homes with this kind of unique model. Now, if our situation improves significantly so that we can add another 200 and another 500, we will. But we're not going to do anything that will jeopardize the stability that young people need in their lives. That's not what we're about.
Thank you very much. Anybody else, any other questions before I speak? Thank you. Thank you very much, as I was saying to you about your presentation. And thank you also for agreeing to provide a safeguarding management plan, which is extremely important because we were extremely concerned about the possibility of mental health issues with these young people, especially we don't know at this stage how COVID-19 is going to go. Is it going to extend? It is going to improve or deteriorate? And so if the residents are not able to mingle with colleagues, with other residents downstairs in the amenity areas, perhaps they are confined to their rooms, they may suffer some mental problems. So that was one of my concerns. The other concern that I have is the ILOs and ILAs, although they had been trained, meticulously trained, as I understand, they are volunteers. They are not experts. And also that I understand is not going to be an office where the residents are going to knock on the office and say, I have a problem, can I talk to you now? So those are my reservations on that, or those are my questions.
I'll attempt to answer this one for you. So the independent living officer is a paid member of Centrepoint staff. So they will be a permanent member of staff, and they will be responsible for doing the transition from into the independent living. So they will be on hand for a young person should they need support. You're quite right, the independent living advisor is the volunteer, but a specialist volunteer who we've trained up to give them more pastoral care for a young person. So probably take the role of mum and dad. So between the two, there's a pretty good support mechanism. The other thing that Centrepoint has in as part of our service support is that we have our own mental health team. So we have our own set of psychotherapists. So should a young person identify that they've got any support needs, because I think your point is really well made about COVID and not being able to socialise and mingle, then they would have access to that mental health support team.
Thank you. And also thank you very much for responding quite quickly to the questions raised by our chair, Councillor Soames. And I think that there are no further questions from her. She was, I think, satisfied. Again, the only thing that she was concerned about it were the questions that Councillor Martin Seaton has asked already, and also by the mental health, the possible mental health of the residents. But you have answered to those things. I think you have it well covered. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. So we go ahead to, does anyone present lives within 100 meters of the development and is in support of the application?
Chair, there were no registered supporters.
Okay. There is any ward councillors present that they would like to speak in support or against the presentation, the application?
I can't see any ward councillors.
Okay. Thank you very much. So now is the time for debate. Would any member of the committee like to speak further on this matter? Councillor Seaton? Do you want to speak further on this matter?
Before me, in fact. I think Councillor Mill got in there before me, in fact.
Councillor Mills, would you like to speak about anything else that concerns or you are concerned about it?
Okay, I suppose, you know, broadly I'm not concerned. Broadly I'm pretty content, and I'm, you know, I kind of absolutely supportive of something that helps get young people out of supported housing, because we certainly know in Southwark that people stay in supported housing beyond when they should. And one of the reasons for it is that there's not a kind of clear step down from that, which this scheme, you know, kind of innovatively tries to do. So I think I'm kind of broadly happy, and I'm broadly comfortable with where we've got to on size and design standards. I think that my the kind of remaining things for me are you know, the issues that Councillor Seaton raised about what happens if there's ever an issue with Centrepoint. We take the assurances that we've been given, but you know, it would be good to know whether, you know, is there an option for the council to step in if there's a kind of provider failure? I don't know, how does that work? It would be good for Dipesh just to recap on the kind of the 106, which ensures that this accommodation can only be used for young people who meet these various criteria. I'd quite like to fully understand that again, regardless of who the provider is. And then, you know, I take the warm words around wanting it to be Southwark young people here, but is there anything further that we can do to make sure that Southwark young people are definitely getting first dibs on the accommodation? So they're my kind of 3 issues.
Either Glenn or Dipesh would like to answer to that.
I can come in on that, Chair. So in terms of what would happen if Centrepoint weren't able to continue on the site, and that sort of builds onto the second point you had, Councillor Mills. Any person taking ownership of this site after Centrepoint, if they were to leave, would be constrained by the same controls that are in the legal 106. So I suppose we could use an analogy where we have a residential development that requires affordable housing at a certain rate, and any future purchaser of that land or that development would need to continue to buy to provide that. So that includes the site being for young people, that includes the site being for people, one person living within the dwellings, the support and them being in education and the sort of support package around that. So all of that's tied into the 106.
What about the third of their salary rent payment? Is that included too?
That's all going to be included into the 106. So if Centrepoint do move away, any company, any organisation looking to buy that would have to buy the land with that 106 in place and would be committed to ensuring that they comply with it. I think there was also a question, so if that answers the sort of first 2 points there, Councillor Mills. The other question you had was about young people and Southwark young people. So we, Centrepoint, have started discussions and we in planning have started discussions with colleagues in our children's and adults services. As Shay mentioned, the wording isn't completely finalised, but there is an agreement in principle from Centrepoint to provide the first option to Southwark residents, and if we couldn't fill it with Southwark residents, it would then go to other residents. So similar to affordable housing and nominations rights in that regard. Is that okay, Councillor Mills?
Answer all your questions, Councillor Mills?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Knox, you raise your hand.
It's really to support Councillor Mills, or follow up Councillor Mills' question around sort of that's sort of giving priority, I suppose, to Southwark residents. I mean, I hear what you say, Dipesh, but I mean, what happens if that doesn't? I mean, is there any chance that won't, that what you discussed with Children's Services, if that doesn't come to fruition, is there any safeguard, or is there any? Can we put an informative indicating our support for something? Is there anything we should be doing additionally tonight before we agree or consider this application?
I think people from Centrepoint have made it quite clear that the priority will be for Southwark residents, and this is something that you and other members have made it clear that you want. So it's then up to us as officers and the colleagues from Centrepoint to then make sure that that is securely enshrined within the 106. So I don't think there's any more that you as members can do to ask us to get that secured anymore. The wording still needs to be worked out, and it needs to be worked out so that a dwelling doesn't stay empty for any significant period simply because we can't fill it by with a Southwark resident, and that technical detail will be worked out with our colleagues in children's and adults.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any amendments, conditions arising from the addendum report and the members debate that are agreed by the committee. Councillor Seaton.
First of all, Chair, I'd just like to say I'm very content with the application and the responses I've received today. And I'm grateful to Councillor Mills and Noakes for their subsequent questions, which were my own. And so I'm now reassured. I wish to encourage other providers like Centrepoint to think of these ways to support particularly those young people who've been homeless or disaffected and will find it extremely difficult to get onto the rental ladder, let alone the housing ladder. The wraparound support you are offering is an offer, but they're not dependent upon it. So you're seeking that they become independent, and I can only but give support to an application of this nature. Whilst I'm still always concerned, and I'm notwithstanding the comment by Patel Depeche as regards the if Centrepoint were to withdraw from the scheme, I would like Centrepoint to remain committed to Southwark, and whatever mechanism I can come up with that commits Centrepoint to Southwark, I'd like to do. I personally, and I might push this now. I personally want the chair or other of Centrepoint to indicate that in the event that Centrepoint had financial problems, this particular project would gain priority resources regardless. I just want to ensure that we've been asked to make a considerable reduction on what is a really important area of concern, that is our space standards. Our experience in other places suggests that these space standards have long-lasting impact on the individuals. And whilst I can accept for a temporary period, we can this may be acceptable, but if we are to do such a thing, we just want reassurance that Centrepoint remains committed to Southwark. So, and notwithstanding the chairman's comment previously, and I noted it, if it were enshrined in either a Section 106 agreement between your board and ourselves, that in the event that Southwark, Centrepoint were to enter financial problems, highly unlikely, mind you, but I've found in life it's the unexpected, which is you have to look out for. In the unlikely event that Centrepoint would enter financial difficulties, that this project will be given priority financial support by themselves. Now, that's really what I'd like. I'll leave the planning expert to translate what I've just said into either an agreement in Section 106 or some other undertaking provided by Centrepoint.
Thank you very much, Councillor Seaton. I very much support Councillor Seaton and also Councillor Mills and Councillor Noakes in what they have said. So I would like to move that we adopt the office's recommendation as set on our paragraph 1 of the report on page 50C of the agenda pack. The recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to legal agreement, or B, if the legal agreement is not compelled by the 21st of December 2020, that the director of planning be authorized to refuse planning permission, if appropriate, for the reasons detailed on paragraph 65 of this report. Does any member of the committee wish to second this application?
Sorry, Chair, if I can just cut in. Just to say that the recommendation should read that it's subject to legal agreement and the conditions in the report and addendum report. And it's paragraph 66, not 65. I'm sorry, that's wrong.
It is 65, note. Apologize, it's 65 on my members' briefing. So it's 66. Okay, yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. So is anybody, any of the members wish to second this?
I second it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Islam. So before the committee proceeds to the vote, any member of the committee may speak on the motion or propose an amendment. No? In that case, can we go ahead for the vote? And I'm going to mention the names of each one of the members by name, and then you can just agree or disagree how you are going to vote.
Sorry,
Councillor,
just before we go to the vote, just the just that's incredibly wide as to how we might capture that within a Section 106 agreement. So if we are to include that, we need to work out how officers are going to secure that, and it might be that we have to take that away and work out what would be acceptable with the developer, and take a view on it ultimately as to whether or not it complies with what you've asked us to secure. So we can do that and take that one away. So I just thought I'd flag that. And if we think it doesn't, if what we agree with them doesn't quite match with what you've asked for, then we wouldn't be able to complete the 106.
okay. Do you want to say something, Councillor Seaton?
Thank you, Chair. Again, in order to accept such a significant reduction in our space standards, the reasons have to be exceptional. So the exceptional reasons that have been set out are that there is a wraparound service, the residents would not pay no more than a third of their salary. There is on-site leisure communal space, and that there is an intention that the young person should be there for a maximum of 5 years, but you're working towards that you should leave before that time. That is fine, but I've asked, and I'm pleased that Clark has pointed out that I was going to include as part of the informative that the real desire is that there's a clear commitment from Centrepoint to continue to support this project beyond 5 years. And it's a form of wording that I wanted to include, either an undertaking from the board of Centrepoint that they will continue to support this project. You could use the word in perpetuity. I'd be more than content with that. Yep. Or there's some other wordings that are included in the Section 106 agreement that clearly binds Centrepoint to commit beyond the 5-year period. How it's achieved, I'll definitely leave it to the planning professionals. But if it were not achievable, then I'd like it to be a discussion point at a future meeting. Because clearly, the concession we've been asked to make is so significant and would, under normal circumstances, would not be considered. Okay? These space standards are there for good reason. Less than 50% or more reduction in space standards is extremely significant. And what I would want to do is set out to the rest of the world that we would accept such a reduction without it truly being exceptional, and we've ensured that the long-term interest of Southwark is being secured. So the only way I can see that being achieved, that's if the organisation concerned binds themselves into a clear agreement that says that they will commit to the project beyond 5 years, and they can find an alternative form of wording if from the chairman of the board, indicating that there's a clear commitment and they've set aside their donations, which ensure that this project will exist beyond a 5-year period. I'd be more than happy to give 100% support to it. But without those provisions, without those safeguards, I've learned in life that if you don't do it now, it will not happen. So I just want an interpretation from the officers, if that's doable, or am I asking too much at this time? Then indeed, if that is the case, then we might need to look at the space standards again to assess whether or not the reduction is too much in that case.
Councillor Seaton and Chair, yeah. if I may come in there. So if I was understood you, Councillor Seaton, I think I have, you're looking for assurance that Centrepoint will commit to Southwark. And I'm maybe looking at Alex, and it might be worth the people from Centrepoint commenting also, but we could maybe have something within the legal agreement that requires Centrepoint to use all reasonable endeavours to ensure that this site and this project is funded in the long term, and that's just an initial thought I've had. But the phrasing reasonable endeavours, I think would achieve what you're looking for, Councillor Seaton, and would maybe give Centrepoint something they can sign up to. That might not be something they can sort of give a yes or no to today, but something along those lines could be something we can negotiate.
That's fine, Chair.
Thank you, Dipesh, and I agree with Councillor Seaton. I think that is whatever the changes are. I think that they are very important, and we need to endeavour to have them. Particularly, I think we are going to need a legal input to have it right. So, without further ado,
sorry, Chair. Sorry, Chair. I was just going to ask on that point whether members would like to hear from Centrepoint on that question.
Could I? Oh.
So can we move and ask Centrepoint to speak, please? If the members want, that is.
Yes, Chair.
Comfortable taking that?
I'm happy to take that. There's nothing more that I can add to what I said before. We are committed to Southwark. There's no question about that at all. We were founded in London. We've been around for 50 years. I take your point that nobody knows what tomorrow will bring or can bring. But as long as Centrepoint is alive and kicking, then actually our commitment to the scheme and to Southwark is solid. I'm quite happy to engage with my board for perhaps a reasonable endeavour sort of letter of undertaking about that, if it gives you that further assurance. Our ambition really is to prove that this model works and then get other people who are much bigger than us to do more of it. If we can prove that it works, then actually we can break this cycle for young people forever. But we need you to say yes today so that we can do that. And by the way, if you give me land tomorrow in Southwark, I will build another one. That's also a guarantee.
Thank you very much. Any further questions before we go for the vote?
Councillor Mills had indicated, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Mills, please.
I'm not against what Councillor Seaton is proposing, but I do want to say that if Centrepoint proves that the model works, but it's not something that they can continue funding, it will almost certainly be in the council's financial interest to continue the model that is being set up. So if it works for the young people, it's almost certainly more cost effective than us maintaining Southwark young people in supported housing beyond when, you know, where they should be in supported housing. That makes sense. So I kind of think it's a no-brainer. You know, if Centrepoint fail financially, which I desperately hope they don't, but the model succeeds, then surely we would be stepping in.
I don't think we can commit the council at the moment, but Councillor Seaton, do you want to say something?
If Councillor Mills was still in the cabinet, and I would have accepted that statement, or if you had a letter from the leader, I would also accept the statement. But I suspect you are correct. I suspect you are correct. Nevertheless, that is not the point right now. Thank you. It's Centrepoint who are the point, and my job here is to ensure that we protect the interest of Southwark and Southwark's young people, and where we've been asked to make significant reduction in our policies, concessions in our policies, that we extract from those applicants the optimum, the maximum return to ensure that we can protect our residents. And only way I can see that happening is, one, if we are to concede on the space standards, which are very significant, okay, we need absolute assurance that the applicants are totally committed, notwithstanding the remarkably charismatic chairman's expositions. Okay, I've got no doubt about that. But of course, I may not be here tomorrow, God forbid, but you know, I sure might say otherwise, or others may not be here tomorrow. So it's the paperwork that will matter. and therefore we need to ensure the paperwork says the following. And I've outlined what I've suggested, that Centrepoint is committed beyond the 5-year period, and to use the words of the planning experts here, using reasonable endeavours. And I'd accept that as a statement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Knox, you want to make a point?
I mean, I think it's just to support Councillor Seaton's points, really. I mean, I think possibly a solution was suggested. I mean, I think obviously Depeche has indicated that there are plans to sort of make sure that Southwark residents get priority where they can do, and where not, obviously, understandably, they'll be filled by people elsewhere in London. But maybe some sort of memorandum of understanding, sort of laying out Centrepoint's commitment to the project and to remaining in Southwark. You know, personally, I'd probably be satisfied with that. I think that would be sufficient, and hopefully would allow us to make a decision on tonight's application.
Thank you very much. I also support fully Councillor Seaton's point of view. So, are we ready to move to the vote?
So, sorry, Chair, can I just ask one thing? So we've talked about that assurance from Centrepoint and the commitment to Southwark. We just need to be sure how that's going to be secured. Is it something members want in the legal agreement, or is a memorandum of understanding, as Councillor Noakes has said, sufficient assurance?
I think both. Sorry, is what my intention.
Okay.
And are they not two slightly separate things? We say memorandum of understanding in terms of nomination, and legal agreement in terms of Centrepoint's commitment beyond 5 years. That was how I was understanding
Actually,
it.
I was thinking of the other way around,
Right, okay.
personally, but I was thinking but I'm happy to take advice for legal advice and planning advice as well.
Pesh, what are you recommending here?
I think we're working on a legal agreement, and to make things simpler, my advice would be to have it all rolled up in the legal agreement. I don't know if Alex, you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think the 106 should refer to nominations, and it should also refer to this clause we've just been discussing about using reasonable endeavours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anything further, Depeche?
No, thank you, Chair.
And we move now to the vote. Is if everybody happy, then we can move to the vote.
Chair, I think that from Centrepoint wanted to say something.
Yes, I wanted to say that I don't believe we can have a legal agreement that would say Centrepoint will underwrite this cost in perpetuity, for the very reason that Councillor Seaton talked about. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So how can you then uphold that sort of legal agreement? However, I can give you a assurance. I can sign an undertaking that of reasonable endeavors to that commitment over that period of time. I have no problem with that. But if you're talking about, binding it in law, it's bound to fail.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes, please.
I'm happy with the Chairman's response. Reasonable endeavours is all we seek at this stage. I'm happy with that response.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wants to say anything? Or anybody else wants to speak? No, thank you. So now I'm going to mention the names of all the members, and then you have to reply if you want to vote for, against, or abstain. Councillor Sirajul Islam, please.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Victoria Mills.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor David Noakes.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Seaton.
For, Chair.
And myself, for. Thank you very much. So because it's now 2016, so the it has been accepted and it has been unanimously agreed. So because it's 2016, do we want to have a comfort break?
If we could,
For
Chair,
5 minutes?
most grateful, Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we're resuming here at 20.